The floorboards pressed into my knees, a dull, insistent pain that I barely registered. Up here, in the attic, the world was dust and silence. A single, sharp beam of sunlight cut through a crack in the roof, illuminating a frantic dance of dust motes. They were like tiny, forgotten ghosts, swirling in the stale air. I hadn't come up here to spy. I was looking for old photo albums, something to quiet the unease that had been coiling in my gut for weeks. But then I'd heard his voice. My son-in-law, Mark. Downstairs, in the living room Richard and I had painted a soft robin's egg blue 30 years ago, he was on the phone. His voice, usually a smooth, rich baritone, the sound of expensive suits and practiced charm, was different. It was a clipped, venomous whisper, stripped of all its polish. It was the voice of a predator closing in. I held my breath, my ear pressed to a gap in the floorboards, the rough wood scratching my cheek. "The doctor is on board," Mark hissed. "I told you. Albright gets it. It's a textbook case," he said. "We just need to document everything." A pause. He was listening to someone on the other end, someone complicit in this nightmare. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. No, she won't suspect a thing. She trusts me. She trusts Chloe. That's the beauty of it. Another pause. I could picture him down there, pacing on the Persian rug I'd haggled for in a dusty Istanbul market, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He was always so conscious of his appearance, of the image he projected. The successful real estate developer, the devoted husband, the caring son-in-law. It was all a lie, a meticulously crafted, beautiful lie. "The house alone is worth 3 million. Easy," he continued, and the number hung in the air, cold and heavy. "But we can't touch it while she's the owner of record. It's all in her name." Richard made sure of that. Smart old bastard. His laugh was a short, ugly bark. But not smart enough. The path is clear. We file for conservatorship. We present Dr. Albright's testimony, my notes, Chloe's concerned observations. We declare her mentally incompetent. The court will see an elderly woman, confused, living alone in a massive house she can't manage. They'll see a loving family trying to do what's best for her. My breath hitched. Conservatorship. Incompetent. The words were clinical, brutal. They were stripping me of my life, my home, my very self, and packaging it as an act of kindness. "By the time she realizes what's happening," he said, his voice dropping with finality, "she'll be in a comfortable, private room at Silver Pines. They have a lovely garden," I checked, "and we'll be signing the listing agreement. The market is hot. It'll be gone in a week. Don't worry about Chloe. She's emotional, but she gets it. She knows this is the only way." Silver Pines. The name sounded so gentle, so serene. I imagined a place with pale green walls and smiling, empty-eyed nurses. A gilded cage where they would put me to forget and to be forgotten. The dust motes settled around me as his call ended. The silence that followed was heavier, more suffocating than his words. My knees ached. My back screamed, but I didn't move. I stayed there, on the floor of my attic, a ghost in my own home, the cold reality of my situation seeping into my bones. He wasn't just planning to sell my house. He was planning to erase me. The chill from the attic floor seemed to follow me downstairs, a phantom cold that even the warmth of the house couldn't touch. It clung to me as my mind drifted back, just to the night before. He sat at my table, in Richard's chair. The thought sent a fresh spike of ice through my veins. He'd sat there, in my husband's place, and smiled as he carved the roast chicken I'd made. The same recipe Richard had loved. "This is fantastic, Liz," he'd said, laying a perfect slice on Chloe's plate. You're a miracle worker in the kitchen." I had smiled, a tired but genuine smile. I loved cooking for them. I loved the illusion of family it created. The brief, shining moments where I could pretend we weren't all just orbiting the black hole of grief Richard had left behind. Then, he'd put down the carving knife, his expression shifting to one of gentle, loving concern. A mask he wore so well. "Liz, sweetheart, are you sure you locked the back door tonight? I just checked and it was unlatched." I froze, the fork halfway to my mouth. "Oh, I thought I did." "It's okay," he said, his voice soft, forgiving. "It's an easy thing to forget. You've just got so much on your mind." He glanced at Chloe, a quick, meaningful flicker of his eyes. It was a tiny gesture, almost invisible, but I saw it. It was a signal. "See? It's happening, just like I said." Asterisk. Chloe, my daughter, my only child, picked up her cue perfectly. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cool. "Don't worry about it, Mom. It happens. This is a big house. It's a lot to keep track of." Her look of concern, the one I used to treasure as a sign of her love, now felt rehearsed. It was a look he had taught her, a look of pity, a look one gives to a child or to someone who is fading. The conversation had then drifted, but the undercurrent was there, a poison seeping into the wine. Mark started talking about the property taxes, how they'd gone up again. He mentioned a quote he'd gotten for repairing the roof, sighing dramatically at the cost. He talked about the loneliness of this big, empty house. Every word was a stone, carefully chosen, carefully placed. He wasn't having a conversation. He was building a case. He was constructing the walls of my prison, right there at my own dinner table, and my own daughter was handing him the mortar. "Maybe we should look into getting you some help around the place, Mom," Chloe had suggested, her voice full of feigned brightness. "Someone to help with the upkeep, the chores. It's just too much for one person. Or maybe," Mark interjected gently, "it's time to consider simpler options. A place where you don't have to worry about a thing, where you can just relax and be taken care of. Silver pines." He was talking about silver pines even then. He was planting the seed in Chloe's mind, in my mind. He was selling my own damn cage to me and wrapping it in a bow of love and concern. I looked at Chloe, searching her face for a flicker of defiance, a sign that my daughter was still in there, behind the worried mask. I saw nothing, just a placid agreement. A daughter already convinced that her mother was a burden, a problem to be solved, managed, put away, in that moment. Sitting at the table where we'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where Richard had told bad jokes and Chloe had spilled her milk as a little girl, I had never felt so utterly, terrifyingly alone. The roast chicken on my plate tasted like ash. I wasn't just losing my home. I was losing my daughter. He had already stolen her from me. Now, crouching on the floor, the truth of that dinner, of all the little comments and concerned looks over the past few months, fell into place like pieces of a shattered mirror. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't forgetful. I was being gaslit, methodically, patiently, and expertly. The shock I felt in the attic began to curdle into something else. Something hot and sharp. Rage. A cold, quiet rage that burned away the fog of grief and confusion. But it wasn't Mark's face I saw when I closed my eyes. It wasn't Chloe's. It was Richard's. My mind slipped away from the polished wood of the dining room and the dusty floorboards of the attic back a year ago, to the final weeks of my husband's life. They'd called it a sudden heart attack, a massive coronary. "Quick," they said. He wouldn't have suffered. But he had been suffering for weeks. He had become a ghost in this house long before he died. He'd shut himself away in his study, the one room I was never allowed to clean. He said he needed his system, his piles of paper, his ledgers. He was a meticulous man, a brilliant accountant who had built a small but fiercely successful private firm. I'd always thought his obsession with order was just part of who he was. But in those last weeks, it was more than that. It was a fever. He looked hunted. There were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. He lost weight. He would sit at his desk for hours, the door locked, surrounded by stacks of files and binders. Sometimes I'd hear him on the phone, his voice low and tense, not the voice of a man discussing tax returns. The sound was the same as Mark's had been, the sound of fear. I tried to talk to him. "Richard, what is it? You're wearing yourself to a thread. Let me help." He would just shake his head, a strange, distant look in his eyes. "It's nothing, Liz. Just a complicated client. Almost finished." But it wasn't a client. I knew that now. He was preparing for something. A battle. He was trying to protect me from something he saw coming. Something I couldn't. The night before he died, the memory was so vivid. It was like stepping back into the moment. He couldn't sleep. He came out of the study around midnight, looking pale and utterly exhausted. He didn't come to bed. Instead, he walked down the hall and stood before the great tapestry. My masterpiece. It had taken me 3 years to weave. It was the story of our life together. A sprawling landscape of thread. In the center was our house. Smoke curling from the chimney. There was the old oak tree in the backyard where we'd carved our initials. There was the little sailboat we took out on the lake every summer. The faces of our parents, of a baby Chloe, of us on our wedding day. It was 40 years of love and laughter and struggle, all captured in wool and silk. He stood there for the longest time, just looking at it. Then he reached out a trembling hand and traced the woven image of the house. His touch was so light, so full of sorrow. "Everything we are is in there, Liz," he'd whispered, his voice raspy. "Our whole story. All of it." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were burning with an intensity that frightened me. He gripped my arm, his fingers surprisingly strong. "It will protect you. Do you understand me? It will protect you." I had just nodded, my throat tight with tears. I thought it was sentiment. The poetic, heartfelt words of a dying man who knew his time was short. I thought he meant our love, our memories, the strength of the life we'd built together would be my shield. I'd held him and told him I loved him. And the next morning, I found him slumped over his desk. Now, sitting in the cold silence of my house, his words echoed in my mind, not as poetry, but as a blueprint, a strategy. "It will protect you." Asterisk. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal instruction. A warning. Richard knew. He knew someone was coming for what we had built. He must have known it was Mark. He had seen the serpent we had welcomed into our home, and he had spent his final days forging a weapon to leave behind for me, a weapon hidden in plain sight. I pushed myself up, my joints groaning in protest. The pain was real, a grounding force in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. I walked out of the living room and into the hall. There it was, the tapestry. It covered most of the wall, its colours still rich and vibrant. To anyone else, it was a beautiful piece of folk art, a testament to a wife's love and skill. But to me now, it was something more. It was an arsenal. It was a promise from my dead husband. I didn't know how, and I didn't know what I was looking for. But as I stood there, my hand hovering over the woven threads, the fear that had paralyzed me began to recede. It was replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Mark thought I was a confused old woman. Chloe thought I was a burden. They were about to find out how wrong they were. They were in my house, my world, and they had just woken the weaver from her sleep. Richard had left me a map, and I was going to follow it, thread by painful thread. The fight for my life had just begun. The sound of the doorbell was like a judge's gavel, sharp, final, and 2 days sooner than I would have liked. I was in the kitchen, washing my hands, and I let the water run over them for a moment longer, feeling the cool shock travel up my arms. It was a physical anchor in a world that was threatening to dissolve into a nightmare. I dried my hands on my apron, the familiar floral print cotton, a small comfort, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw Mark. And next to him, a man I didn't know. He was tall, thin, with a briefcase that looked too heavy for him, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They were cold, calculating eyes. The eyes of a man who looks at a person and sees a problem to be solved, a box to be ticked. This had to be the doctor. I took a breath, letting the carefully constructed persona of a dotty old woman settle over me like a shroud. I fumbled with the deadbolt for a moment too long. A small, believable performance. When I finally opened the door, I blinked, as if surprised by the daylight. "Mark, what a surprise. You didn't say you were coming." My voice was a little thin, a little reedy. "Hi, Mom," he said, his own voice oozing a thick, syrupy concern that made my skin crawl. "Sorry to just drop in. This is my friend, Dr. Albright. We were in the neighborhood and I just had to show him your beautiful garden." "A friend? Of course. A friend who carries a medical bag disguised as a briefcase." "Oh," I said, looking at the doctor. "It's a pleasure. But the garden's a bit of a mess right now. The roses need deadheading." I let my eyes drift away, towards the corner of the ceiling, as if I'd lost my train of thought. "Nonsense, Liz, it's lovely," the doctor said, stepping inside. His name was Albright, a name that sounded clean and bright, a stark contrast to the dirty work he was here to do. He extended a hand. His grip was firm, dry, impersonal. "Mark talks about you all the time." "Does he?" I said, turning my gaze back to Mark, putting just a hint of confusion in my eyes. "All good things, I hope." Mark laughed. It was a hollow sound. "Of course, Mom. The best. Can we come in for some coffee? I'd love for you and Robert to chat." He almost slipped. He almost called him doctor again. I filed that away. "Coffee? Oh, I'm not sure I have any. Did I buy coffee this week? I can't seem to remember." I padded towards the kitchen, my slippers scuffing on the hardwood floors. Before I sat down on my favorite armchair in the living room, the one with the slightly faded chintz, I did something I had practiced in my head a dozen times. My phone was in my apron pocket. As I lowered myself into the chair with a theatrical sigh, my hand slipped between the seat and the cushion, my thumb finding the side button, pressing it 3 times. A silent vibration against my palm confirmed it. The screen was off, but the microphone was live. The phone was now nestled deep in the crevice, my own silent digital witness. "Don't worry about the coffee, Liz," Dr. Albright said, taking the seat opposite me. Mark hovered near the fireplace, a vulture waiting for the kill. "It's just nice to sit and talk. This is a beautiful home, so much history here." "Yes," I said, my voice distant. "Richard and we bought it a long time ago. He loved the big windows." I let my sentence trail off, my gaze fixed on a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam. "Play the part, Liz. Play it for your life." "Richard was your husband," Albright stated, not asked. He was making a note on a small pad he'd produced from his jacket. "My husband," I repeated softly. "He's gone now. I'm sorry for your loss, When did he pass, Liz? I hesitated. I knew the date down to the minute. I knew the pattern of the hospital blankets and the smell of antiseptic that clung to everything. But I pretended to search the ceiling for the answer. Oh, it was a while ago. In the winter, I think. The snow was very heavy that year. Richard had died in July. Mark shifted his weight. I could feel his impatience, his eagerness. And what year is it now, Liz? Albright asked, his voice gentle, patronizing. I looked at him, my head tilted. Year? Goodness. They go by so fast, don't they? Is it 23? It's 2025, Mom, Mark corrected, his tone dripping with pity. Oh, 2025. My goodness. Well, time flies when well, it just flies. It certainly does, Albright agreed, scribbling another note. And who is the president, Liz? Can you tell me that? I could have told him the entire line of succession. I could have discussed the political platforms of the last 4 administrations. Instead, I frowned. The president. That actor? The one from the old movies? I was mixing up my decades. A classic sign of cognitive decline. No, Mom, Mark sighed. That was a long time ago. Oh, was it? I looked from Mark to the doctor, my face a mask of befuddled innocence. Well, I don't follow the news much anymore. It's all so loud. I understand, Albright said. Let's try something else. It's a little game. Can you count backward for me? From 100, but I want you to take away 7 each time. So 100, then 93, and so on. Can you do that? This was it. The classic test. My mind, sharp as a weaver's needle, did the calculations instantly. 100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65. But my mouth did something different. 100, I began confidently. 93, 80, 80, 6, 70, 9, 72, 60, 6. No, that's not right. I stopped, flustered. I pressed my fingers to my temple. Oh, I'm sorry. My head gets all jumbled up with numbers these days. Richard was the one who was good with numbers. Not me. I saw it then, out of the corner of my eye. A small, satisfied smirk on Mark's face. He was looking at Dr. Albright, a look that said, See? I told you so. Asterisk. The recording was capturing everything. The doctor's leading questions, Mark's sighs of manufactured frustration, my own award-winning performance. It was my first piece of ammunition. A single, perfect cartridge, chambered and ready. That's quite all right, Liz, the doctor soothed. No need to worry. One last thing. Can you tell me the name of the street we're on right now? I lived on Maple Street for 45 years. I knew every crack in the sidewalk, every tree that had been planted, and every one that had been cut down. It's the one with the big oak tree on the corner, I said, my voice wavering. You know, by the park. It's Maple Street, Mom, Mark said, stepping forward. He placed a hand on my shoulder. The touch felt like a brand. See, Robert? This is what I've been so worried about. I see, Dr. Albright said, closing his notepad. He stood up. Liz, it was a genuine pleasure to meet you. You have a wonderful son, looking out for you like this. I just smiled, a vague, pleasant smile. I watched them walk to the door, Mark guiding the doctor by the elbow, whispering. I couldn't hear the words, but I could guess. Worse than I thought. Silver Pines. As soon as possible. Asterisk. When the door clicked shut, I sat perfectly still for a full minute. The silence in the house was immense. I reached down into the cushion, my fingers closing around the cool, hard shape of my phone. I pulled it out, my thumb swiping up and hitting the red button to stop the recording. I saved the file. I named it Serpent. The adrenaline that had been coursing through me began to subside, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. The performance was over. The fight was just beginning. And I knew exactly who my first ally had to be. I didn't wait. Procrastination was a luxury for people who weren't having their lives stolen out from under them. I scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering for a second over Chloe's name. A pang, sharp and deep, went through my chest. I pushed it down. There was no help there. Not anymore. I kept scrolling until I found her. Ava, my granddaughter. A world away at the University of Oregon, studying to be a journalist. She had my fire and Richard's integrity. She was my only hope. I pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Grandma, is everything okay?" Her voice was young, clear, and full of concern. She knew I never called in the middle of a weekday. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. The time for that was over. "Ava," I said, and I was proud of how steady my voice was. There were no tears, no hysterics, just cold, hard fact. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't interrupt. Your father is trying to have me declared incompetent. He brought a doctor here today to assess me. He plans to put me in a home and sell my house." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Not a skeptical silence. It was a silence of gears turning, of pieces clicking into place. Then, a sharp intake of breath. When she spoke again, her voice was a fierce whisper. "I knew it. Oh, Grandma, I knew it." A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. She believed me. Instantly. No questions, no doubt. "You did?" "Yes. He's been weird for months. On the phone, he's always talking about money, about being underwater. He's jumpy, desperate. Last time I was home, I heard him on the phone with Mom, yelling about the carrying costs of your house. When I asked him about it, he just said he was worried about you being alone in such a big place. It felt wrong. It felt like a lie. He had been laying the groundwork for months, seeding the idea, making it seem like a kindness. My son-in-law, the patient predator. It was a lie, Ava, I said. He wants the $3 million this house is worth, and I think your mother is helping him." Another silence. This one was heavier, freighted with the pain of a daughter hearing about her mother's betrayal. "Mom, too?" she whispered. "I'm afraid so." I didn't soften the blow. She needed to know the full truth of what we were up against. She had the mind of a journalist. She dealt in facts, no matter how ugly. "Okay," she said, and the whisper was gone. In its place was steel. "Okay. What do you need, Grandma? Tell me what to do." Hope, which had been a flickering candle flame in a hurricane, now blazed into a bonfire. This was my girl. "He's desperate," you said. "I need to know why. Not just general money troubles. I need specifics. I need to know what kind of hole he's in that would make him do this. You're the journalism student. You're the one who knows how to dig in this digital world. I need you to dig into your father's life. I need you to find everything." "Consider it done," Ava said without a moment's hesitation. "He's not as smart as he thinks he is with computers. He uses the same password for everything. It's the name of his dog from when he was a kid. Buddy 123. Pathetic. I can get into his emails, his social media, his bank records. Give me 24 hours. Be careful, Ava. He can't know you're looking. He won't. I'll use the university's VPNs, bounce the signal through 3 different servers. He'll never see me coming. Grandma, are you okay? Are you safe right now? The genuine fear in her voice touched me more than anything. I'm safe for now, I said. I played the part of a confused old woman. They think I'm harmless. They think they have all the time in the world. Let them think that. It's the only advantage we have. Okay. I'm on it. I'll call you as soon as I have something. And Grandma? Yes, dear? We're going to burn him to the ground. I smiled. A real smile. For the first time in what felt like an eternity. I know we are, sweetheart. I know we are. I sent her $1,000 from my savings account with the note. For expenses. Buy the best coffee and don't sleep. It wasn't just money. It was a transfer of power. A commissioning. I was no longer just a victim waiting for the axe to fall. I was a commander. And I had just deployed my best soldier. Ava was more than a soldier. She was a force of nature. A digital hurricane tearing through the flimsy, constructed world of Mark's life. The calls started less than 12 hours later. Grandma, I'm in, she said, her voice low and crackling with energy. It's worse than we thought. Much worse. I sat by the window, the morning light still grey and soft, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. Tell me. Okay, first, the big one. The reason he's desperate. He sunk everything, and I mean everything, into a high-end real estate project. It's called Pinewood Ecolux. Sounds fancy, right? It's a disaster. I found a private forum for investors he posts on. He's using a fake name, Kingpin, but the project details match. He's talking about catastrophic losses. Apparently the land they bought was an old industrial site. They didn't do their due diligence. There are soil contamination issues. The EPA has halted construction. The cleanup costs are in the millions. His partners have pulled out, and he's on the hook for all of it. He's not just in debt, Grandma. He's ruined. Pinewood Ecolux. I vaguely remembered Chloe mentioning it, something about sustainable living for the 1%. Mark had been so arrogant, so sure of himself. Now that arrogance had a price tag, and he was trying to make me pay it. What else? I asked, my voice flat. His search history. It's chilling. It's a step-by-step guide to what he's doing to you. Ava's voice was filled with disgust. She read the search terms aloud. Each one a hammer blow against my heart. Oregon competency law for seniors. How to get power of attorney for parent with dementia. Legal standard for challenging a will. Best memory care facilities, Portland area. Silver Pines senior living reviews. And costs. He's been researching this for 6 months, Grandma. He even searched, can a family member be forced into a nursing home? He had a plan. A cold, methodical, meticulously researched plan. I was not a person to him. I was an obstacle. An asset to be liquidated. I closed my eyes. The image of his satisfied smirk burned into the back of my eyelids. And Chloe, I whispered. Does she know? Ava was quiet for a moment. I don't know if she knows about the full extent of this plan, Grandma, but she knows he's in trouble. I found emails between them from 3 months ago. She was asking where their savings went. He was being evasive, talking about market downturns and temporary cash flow problems. He was lying to her. But that's not the worst of it. Grandma, are you sitting down? I am. I got into their joint bank accounts. Then I got into Mom's personal accounts. He had the passwords. He must have gotten them from her laptop. Grandma, he liquidated her entire retirement account. The whole thing. Over $200,000. He transferred it to one of his business accounts 2 months ago. She has nothing left. I don't think she even knows it's gone. The teacup slipped from my fingers. It didn't shatter. It hit the thick pile of the rug with a dull, muffled thud, splashing lukewarm tea onto the floor. I didn't even look down. All the air had been forced from my lungs. It wasn't just that he was a thief. It was the scale of the betrayal. He hadn't just come for my money. He had already devoured his own wife's future. He had consumed Chloe's life savings, the money she had diligently put away for 30 years, and she was still standing by his side, ready to help him consume mine. Was she a victim or a co-conspirator? At that moment, it didn't matter. The distinction had blurred into a single terrible image. My daughter, hand in hand with the man who was destroying them both, walking towards me with a serene smile, ready to lock me away forever. The pain was a physical thing, a cold, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't the hot, flashing anger I had felt before. This was different. It was a deep, glacial rage, the kind that freezes you solid, making you hard and unbreakable. Ava, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Thank you. Keep digging. Find everything. I will, Grandma, she promised. I will. I hung up the phone. I didn't clean up the tea. I just sat there, in the silent house, the chill from the floor seeping into my bones. The grief for the daughter I thought I had was immense. It felt like a death. And in the blackest part of that grief, a memory surfaced. Richard, on one of his last good days, sitting in this very chair. His hand, frail and papery, had reached out, not for me, but for the edge of the giant tapestry hanging on the opposite wall. My life's work. His eyes, clouded with illness, but still sharp, had met mine. It's all in there, Liz, he'd whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Everything we built. It's all in the weaving. He'd coughed, a painful rattling sound. It will protect you. At the time, I thought he was being poetic, sentimental, a dying man's romantic notion about my art. My protector was gone. My protection was just wool and silk. But now? Now, hearing the depth of Mark's depravity, the words came back to me not as a memory, but as an instruction, a message sent from across the veil. It will protect you. Asterisk. I stood up, my joints protesting. I walked across the room until I was standing before it. The tapestry was massive, 10 feet wide and 7 feet tall. It depicted our town, Maple Creek. But not as a photograph would. It was a map of my life, of our life together. Every thread was a memory. The deep crimson of the old movie theatre where we had our first date, the shimmering silver grey of the river where we taught Chloe to swim, the brilliant gold of the turning leaves in the town square, the spot where Richard had proposed. The whole thing was a sprawling, intricate testament to a life I was now in danger of losing. My fingers, gnarled and stiff with arthritis, began to trace the familiar patterns. It was a ritual I had performed thousands of times, my own personal rosary. My hands moved over the soft wool of the hills, the smooth silk of the sky. I let my memory guide me, searching for something. I didn't know what. A clue, a sign. Richard's words echoed. Everything we built. Asterisk. He was an accountant, meticulous, organized, a man who believed in ledgers and receipts. His world was one of numbers and paper trails. What did that have to do with my art? My fingers drifted downwards, towards the bottom corner of the tapestry. This section depicted the town's founding, the old stone buildings that made up its historic heart. My threads here were denser, darker, representing the solid foundations. The courthouse, the library, the original town hall. And then I felt it. It was a single thread, part of the stone foundation of the old town hall. To the eye, it was indistinguishable from the hundreds of other grey threads around it, but to my touch, it was an alien. The wool and silk threads were soft, pliable, with a gentle give. This one was different. It was hard, stiff. It didn't yield to my touch. It felt smooth, thin, and unnervingly strong, almost like a strand of fishing line. My heart began to beat faster, a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. I tugged at it gently. A normal thread would fray, or perhaps snap. This one held firm, a thin, rigid line embedded within the soft weave. I hurried to Richard's old study. His hobbies had been as meticulous as his work: stamp collecting, model shipbuilding. On his desk, collecting a fine layer of dust, was the large, brass-handled magnifying glass he used for his stamps. I brought it back to the living room, my hands trembling slightly. I leaned in close, positioning the lens over the strange, stiff thread. I adjusted the focus, the magnified fibers of the surrounding wool swimming in and out of view. And then I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a thread. It wasn't a fishing line. Through the powerful lens, I could see that its surface was not smooth. It was etched, covered in microscopic, impossibly precise markings. They weren't random scratches. They were letters and numbers. A dense, flowing script that wrapped around the filament in a tight spiral. It was a filament of microfilm. I stared, my mind reeling, trying to comprehend the sheer, breathtaking brilliance of it. Richard, my quiet, unassuming Richard. He hadn't just been a meticulous accountant. He had been a genius. He had found a way to turn my art into his archive, to weave his ledgers, his records, his secrets directly into the fabric of our life. It will protect you. Asterisk. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a promise. And hanging on my wall, hidden in plain sight, was the weapon I needed to save myself. A masterpiece of art and espionage, created by a husband's love and a weaver's hand. And I, the weaver, was the only one left who knew how to unravel it. The front door opened without a knock. Chloe stood there, silhouetted against the weak afternoon light. Her face a carefully constructed mask of sorrowful pity. She carried a small bouquet of lilies, funereal and white. She'd always been theatrical. "Mom," she began, her voice a soft, rehearsed coo. "I came alone. I thought we could just talk. Just us." She stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind her. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet of the hall. I didn't move from the armchair where I'd been watching the dust motes dance in the sunbeams, the same chair Richard used to sit in. "Mark is so worried," she continued, placing the flowers on the coffee table. They looked alien and sterile next to my worn books and balls of yarn. "We're all worried about you. This big house. It's just too much for you to manage on your own." I watched her. My daughter. This stranger wearing my daughter's face. Speaking with a voice that was hers, but carried a script written by someone else. I said nothing. Silence was a weapon they hadn't anticipated. "We found the most beautiful place for you, Mom. It's called Silver Pines." She pulled her phone from her pocket, ready to show me pictures of my own gilded cage. "It's more of a community, really. Not a, it has a garden, a lovely one, and activities. There are other people your age. You wouldn't be so alone." The words hung in the air, thick and cloying. Alone. She had the audacity to use that word, after she and her husband had engineered my isolation, brick by painful brick. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for her. She fidgeted with the sleeve of her expensive cashmere sweater. Finally, I spoke. My voice was quiet, rusty from disuse. Does it have a loom, Chloe? She blinked, caught off guard. A what? A loom? A loom, I repeated, my gaze steady. A floor loom. A big one. It needs space. It's heavy. It's loud. Does Silver Pines have room for my loom? Well, I don't know, Mom. I mean, they have an arts and crafts room, I'm sure. You could probably do smaller things. Knitting, maybe? I don't knit, Chloe. I weave. I have for 40 years. I looked past her, toward the living room, where the great tapestry hung on the wall, a silent monument to my life with her father. Does this beautiful place you found have room for my memories? Or is it just a convenient, well-lit warehouse to store me while your husband sells my life to pay his debts? The mask of pity cracked. Just a hairline fracture at first around her eyes. That's not fair. That's not what this is about. Mark's finances have nothing to do with this. This is about you. Your safety. Your health. Dr. Albright was very clear. Ah, yes, Dr. Albright. Mark's new friend. The one who thinks knowing the current president's name is the definitive measure of a human soul. The crack widened. The sorrow in her eyes was hardening, crystallizing into something sharp and ugly. See? This is what I'm talking about. You're getting paranoid. You're connecting things that aren't related. You've been forgetting things for months. Last week you couldn't find your car keys. The week before, you left the stove on. The keys were in your coat pocket, Chloe. You borrowed my car, and the stove was heating water for tea, which you interrupted by calling me in a panic because Mark had misplaced his wallet. I'm old, not senile. There is a difference. It doesn't matter. Her voice rose, losing its gentle, patronizing edge. This isn't a negotiation. It's what's best for you. What's best for me? Or what's best for Mark? I leaned forward, the old springs of the armchair groaning in protest. He's in trouble, isn't he? Deep trouble. I see it in his eyes. He has the look of a man standing on a ledge. How much does he owe, Chloe? How bad is it? You don't know what you're talking about, she snapped, her face flushing a blotchy red. Mark is a good man. He's a good husband. He's trying to build a life for us, for Ava, something you never had to worry about, sitting here in your $3 million house that Richard handed to you. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just an insult, it was a rewriting of history. Richard didn't hand me anything. We built it. Every brick, every board, every thread in that tapestry was a testament to us. He's drowning, Chloe, and he's trying to pull you down with him. Worse, he's trying to use me as a life raft. A raft he plans to scuttle the moment he reaches shore. Stop it! She shrieked, the sound raw and shrill. The mask was gone. All that was left was the anger, the resentment, the guilt she was trying to bury. You've always been like this, judgmental, living in your own little world with your dusty old threads and your memories. You never thought Mark was good enough for me. I thought you were good enough for yourself, I said, my voice dropping again, laden with a sorrow that was all my own. I thought I raised a daughter who could stand on her own 2 feet, not one who would help her husband chain her own mother in a basement. Silver Pines is not a basement. It's necessary. It's a means to an end. Your end. I stood up, feeling the ache in my bones, but my spine was straight. You will stand by and watch him declare me incompetent. You will help him pack my things. You will sign the papers that strip me of my home, my autonomy, my entire life. And you'll tell yourself you're doing it out of love. But you're not. You're doing it out of fear. Fear of losing the life he promised you, a life that was never real to begin with. Her face twisted. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the little girl I once knew, a flash of pain and confusion. But it was gone in an instant. replaced by the hardened glare of a co-conspirator. "Maybe it is what's best," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Maybe you need someone to take care of you. You couldn't even take care of Dad at the end. He was so worried, so tired. Maybe if you hadn't been so lost in your own world, he wouldn't have been under so much stress. Maybe he'd still be here." The blow landed exactly where she intended. It was a sniper's shot to the heart. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't the lie about my mind or the plot to steal my house. It was this: using Richard. Using my deepest grief as a weapon. This was the wound that would never heal. This was the wound that hurt most of all. I walked to the front door and opened it. "You should go now, Chloe." She stared at me, her chest heaving. She wanted to say more, to hurt me more, but she saw something in my eyes that stopped her. The grief was still there, but it now had a core of ice. She snatched her purse from the table, not even glancing at the white lilies she'd brought, and stormed out. I watched her get into her car and speed away, leaving a squeal of tires on the quiet suburban street. I closed the door and leaned against it, the cool wood a small comfort against my back. The wound bled, but it also cauterized something inside me. The part that had hoped, the part that had held out for the daughter I remembered, was gone. Now, there was only the work that needed to be done. I looked at the tapestry on the wall, Richard's last gift, his warning, my salvation. The silence that followed Chloe's departure wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged, a space waiting to be filled with purpose. For 2 days, that purpose was my entire world. The house shrank until it was only the pool of light from my strongest lamp, the polished surface of the dining room table, and the immense silent tapestry that Richard and I had designed together. I worked with a jeweler's magnifying visor strapped to my head and a pair of surgical-grade tweezers in my hand. My artist's hands, which had grown stiff and sometimes trembled with age, were now surprisingly steady. It was as if Richard's own meticulous calm was flowing into me. I wasn't just an old woman in a house. I was an archaeologist, and this tapestry was my tomb of secrets. I started in the bottom left corner, in the section depicting the dark, loamy earth from which a great oak tree grew. Richard had always said every strong thing needed a solid foundation. The threads here felt different. They were the same color, the same texture to the naked eye. But under the intense magnification, I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible rigidity. With the tweezers, I grasped the end of one dark brown thread. My breath hitched. For a moment, doubt washed over me. What if I was wrong? What if this was just a delusion, a fantasy born of grief and fear, just as Chloe had accused? What if I destroyed a piece of my life's work for nothing? I closed my eyes, picturing Richard's face in those last weeks. The worry etched around his eyes. The way he would look at the tapestry, then at me. "It will protect you." Asterisk. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a promise. I pulled. Gently, slowly. I began to extract the thread. It came loose from the dense weave with a soft, whispering sound. It wasn't yarn. It was a polymer filament, impossibly thin, expertly woven to mimic the look and feel of merino wool. I laid the 4-foot strand on a piece of white archival paper under the lamp. Through the magnifying visor, the world transformed. The filament wasn't just a solid line. It was covered in text. Micro-printed text. A string of letters and numbers so small it looked like dust. Richard, my quiet, unassuming accountant husband, had found a way to turn my art into his ledger. I spent hours with that first thread, a simple notepad and pen my only tools. It was a record of an offshore account, a shell corporation in Panama called Viridian Holdings. It detailed a series of small, untraceable transfers, culminating in a single, large deposit. My heart pounded a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. For the next 48 hours, I barely slept. I ate crackers, standing at the table, drank cold coffee, and worked. I became a weaver in reverse, deconstructing my own creation. I extracted a crimson thread from the heart of a woven rose. It contained a list of material invoices, all from a supplier I'd never heard of, Pinewood Materials, LLC. The invoices were for premium steel, reinforced concrete, high-grade wiring, but the payment amounts recorded were triple the market rate. Falsified invoices, kickbacks. The name Pinewood snagged in my memory. It wasn't just a random name for a shell company. Ava's research had mentioned it. Mark's failed real estate venture. The Pinewood Heights development. My hands grew colder. I moved to a section of the tapestry woven in stark greys and blacks, a depiction of a winter storm rolling in over the hills. It was a part I had always found unsettling, but Richard had insisted on its inclusion. "Every story needs its storm, Liz," he'd said. "It's what makes the sunshine meaningful." From the heart of the darkest storm cloud, I extracted a single silver-grey thread. This one was different. It wasn't just numbers and accounts. It was a narrative. Richard's own notes, condensed and encoded. Entry 1. MH requests emergency bridge loan. Project stalled. Cites cash flow issues. Suspect deeper problems. Advised against personal loan. MH extremely agitated. Asterisk. Monsieur H. Mark Hale, my son-in-law. Entry 2. Discovered shadow ledger for Pinewood Materials, LLC. Inflated invoices match wire transfers to Viridian Holdings. MH is not just failing, he is stealing. From his investors. From his own company. Asterisk. I had to sit down. My legs felt weak. I had known Mark was desperate, but this was calculated. Criminal fraud. And Richard had known. He had carried this terrible secret. I kept reading, my eyes straining against the tiny text. The story grew darker, more terrifying. With every millimeter of thread I deciphered. Entry 3. Massive insurance policy taken out on Pinewood construction site. Policy covers catastrophic structural failure. Unusual clause for a project of this size. MH signed it himself. Asterisk. My blood ran cold. I knew what was coming. I remembered the local news story from about a year ago. A tragic accident. A construction site collapse. The final entry on the silver thread was a simple, devastating line. Incident report. Pinewood Site 3, structural collapse. 1 fatality. Foreman Daniel Martinez, age 28. Insurance claim filed by MH 12 hours later. Claim approved for unforeseeable structural weakness. Asterisk. Daniel Martinez. He had a name. He was 28 years old. 6 months before Richard's heart gave out. The stress. It wasn't just work. It was this monstrous secret. Mark hadn't just committed fraud. He'd built a house of cards so rotten that it had collapsed and killed a young man. And then he'd cashed the insurance check. I sat back, the tweezers falling from my numb fingers. The whole story was here, woven into the fabric of my life. The offshore accounts, the falsified invoices, the fraudulent insurance claim, the death of a man. Richard hadn't just been a meticulous accountant. He had been a witness. He had gathered the evidence, piece by damning piece, and hidden it in the one place he knew would be safe, the one thing he knew I would protect with my life. He hadn't just been protecting me from Mark's greed. He had been protecting me from his crimes. He died with the weight of it on his soul, leaving me the map to the truth. The morning sun cast long shadows across the room when the doorbell chimed, a sharp, insistent sound that shattered my 2-day vigil. Through the peephole, I saw a young man in a crisp uniform, holding a clipboard and a stiff, white envelope. A courier. I opened the door. He asked for Elizabeth Hale. I nodded, and he had me sign a digital screen. He handed me the envelope and was gone before I'd even closed the door. My name and address were typed on the front. The return address was a law firm downtown, one I didn't recognize. My hands didn't shake as I opened it. I was beyond that now. The papers inside were cold and official. At the top, in bold, stark letters, were the words, "Petition for emergency, conservatorship, and competency hearing. Asterisk. Asterisk. It was a declaration of war, a formal, legal move to have me declared mentally unfit, to strip me of my rights, and to place my life and assets under the control of a court-appointed guardian. The petitioner, of course, was Mark Hale, with a signed affidavit of support from his loving wife, my daughter Chloe. The ink was barely dry on the page when my phone rang. The screen lit up with Mark's name. I let it ring 4 times, then answered, placing it on speakerphone. "Liz," he said. His voice was smooth, almost gentle, the voice of a reasonable man doing a difficult but necessary thing. "I see you've received the papers. They just arrived, Mark." "Good. I wanted to tell you, this isn't personal. It's for the best. For everyone. You saw how it was with Chloe. You're not well. You need help. And this is the only way to get it for you." I looked at the notes spread across my table. The account numbers. The invoices. The name. Daniel Martinez. "It's done, Liz," he continued, a harder edge creeping into his tone. "The hearing is scheduled. Dr. Albright's report is ironclad. Just sign the consent forms. Don't fight this. Don't make this ugly." The threat was clear. Cooperate, or be publicly humiliated. Go quietly, or we will drag your name, your sanity, your entire life through the mud. He thought he had me cornered. He thought he was talking to a frail, confused old woman who would crumble under the weight of legal jargon and intimidation. He was wrong. "I'll need to think about it, Mark," I said, my voice deliberately neutral. "There's nothing to think about," he started. But I pressed the button, ending the call. The silence that followed was profound. He was too late. He had started a war, but I was the one who had spent the last 48 hours unearthing the arsenal. But I couldn't fight this alone. I was a weaver, not a warrior. I needed an expert. I needed a lawyer. Mark would have a shark from a slick downtown firm. I needed someone with history, with integrity. I needed Richard's lawyer. I called Ava. She picked up on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. "Grandma, are you okay? Chloe came home last night. She was a wreck. She said some awful things." "I'm fine, Ava. Better than fine. I need your help." I didn't waste time. I told her the legal papers had arrived. I told her I needed to find a man named Abernathy, Richard's old lawyer. I spelled out the name. "Abernathy?" she repeated. There was a furious tapping of keys in the background. Ava moved through the digital world like a fish through water. "Okay, I see a Martin Abernathy. Abernathy and Son Legal. He's old school. Specializes in estate law and financial ethics. Mark probably thinks he's long retired or dead. But he's not. Grandma, this is interesting." "What is it?" "His son, David Abernathy, is the and son in the firm. He's not just any lawyer. He's a forensic accountant. Like a top-tier one. He consults for the SEC. He's the guy corporations hire when they think a CEO is cooking the books. He finds things people think are buried forever. A chill went down my spine. It was too perfect. Richard, in his quiet wisdom, hadn't just chosen a lawyer, he'd chosen a lineage of truth-seekers. "Get me an appointment, Ava," I said. "Tell them it's for Elizabeth Hale, Richard Hale's widow. Tell them it's urgent, and it concerns the Pinewood construction project." Less than an hour later, I was in a taxi, a locked portfolio case on my lap. The case contained my notes and 3 of the most damning filaments, each carefully coiled and placed in a separate, labelled glass vial. Abernathy's office wasn't a sleek glass tower. It was in a historic brownstone, with worn leather chairs and shelves groaning under the weight of law books that looked as old as the city itself. Martin Abernathy was a man in his late 70s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. His son, David, was there too, called in via a secure video link on a large screen. He had the same sharp eyes as his father, but with a restless, modern energy. I didn't begin with Mark or the competency hearing. I began with Richard. I placed the portfolio on his vast, polished mahogany desk. "My husband, Richard, was a very meticulous man," I said, my voice steady. "He was also a man of secrets, not out of malice, but out of a desire to protect." I opened the case. I took out the first vial, the one containing the silver-grey thread, and placed it on the desk. He left me a message, a ledger. He wove it into a tapestry. The elder Abernathy leaned forward, his skepticism polite but palpable. David, on the screen, raised an eyebrow. I slid my handwritten notes across the desk. For 20 minutes, there was silence, broken only by the rustle of paper as Martin Abernathy read. He held a magnifying glass to the vial, his eyes widening slightly. David, on the screen, had me hold the vial up to the camera, zooming in until the microprinting was just visible as a faint, textured line. "My God," Martin breathed, looking from my notes to the vial. He looked at his son on the screen. "David?" David was leaning close to his own camera, his expression one of pure, unadulterated professional astonishment. "Mrs. Hale, what you have here? This is unprecedented. We found data on microdots, in hidden hard drives, in coded spreadsheets. But this? Encoding financial records onto a micro-printed filament and weaving it into a piece of art as a storage medium. It's genius. It's analog cryptography. It's brilliant. Can you use it?" I asked, my heart hammering. "Use it?" David let out a short, sharp laugh. "Mrs. Hale, this isn't just a ledger. It's a confession. A detailed, dated, quantifiable confession. The invoices, the offshore account numbers, the insurance fraud, a good prosecutor could build a capital case on this. And the fact that it's connected to the death of Daniel Martinez. Mark Hale is in more trouble than he could possibly imagine." Martin Abernathy looked at me, his eyes no longer skeptical but filled with a grim respect. "Mark Hale filed a competency hearing against you this morning." "I know. He thinks he's putting me in a cage." "He is," the old lawyer said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "He just doesn't realize he's the one who's about to be locked inside it. We are ready, Mrs. Hale. Tell us what you want to do." The plan was set. It was time for the weaver to pull the final thread. The call to Chloe was the hardest performance of my life. I pitched my voice to sound frail, defeated. "Chloe," I began, letting a slight tremor enter my words. "It's Mom. What is it?" Her voice was wary, defensive. "Mark was right. You were all right. I can't fight this. I'm tired." I paused, letting the feigned exhaustion hang in the air. "Before I sign the papers, Could we all just have one last talk? Here, at the house, a final family meeting, to say goodbye to the place properly. There was a muffled conversation on her end. I could hear Mark's voice triumphant. Of course, Mom, she said, her tone softening with relief and victory. We'll be there this evening. They arrived at 7, right on time. They walked in not as aggressors, but as gracious victors coming to accept a surrender. Chloe carried a Tupperware container. I brought some of that casserole you like, she said, a peacemaking gesture that was 6 hours too late. Mark clapped his hands together, a broad, benevolent smile on his face. Liz, I'm so glad you've decided to be reasonable. This is for the best, you'll see. They were smug. They were victorious. They thought the game was over. I led them to the dining room. I had set the table. Not for a meal, but for a tribunal. Please sit, I said. Mark took the seat at the head of the table, Richard's old seat. The sheer arrogance of it almost made me gasp. Chloe sat to his right. I took the chair opposite him. In the corner of the room, near the window, Ava sat curled in an armchair, her phone propped up on her knee. She appeared to be mindlessly scrolling through TikTok, the occasional snippet of a viral song or meme filtering into the room. Her thumb moved with practiced ease, but her eyes, whenever she glanced up, were sharp and focused. She wasn't watching videos. She was live streaming to a private, secure channel. A channel where Martin and David Abernathy, and 2 very interested federal investigators who specialized in financial crimes, were watching every second. A heavy silence settled over the table. Mark broke it, clearing his throat. So, the papers are with our lawyer. We just need your signature, and we can start the transition. We'll help you pack, of course. I let his words hang in the air. Then I looked directly at him. My voice, when I spoke, was no longer frail. It was clear, cold, and resonant. Before we talk about my future, Mark, I'd like to talk about your past. Tell me about the insurance payout for the Pinewood accident. The change in him was instantaneous and profound. The smug, benevolent mask dissolved. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, grey pallor. His eyes darted from me to Chloe, a cornered animal looking for an escape route. What are you talking about? He stammered. Chloe looked confused. Mom, what does that have to do with anything? Oh, it has everything to do with everything, my dear, I said. My gaze locked on Mark. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out one of the glass vials. The silver-grey filament coiled inside caught the light from the chandelier, glimmering like a captured piece of a spider's web. I held it up, because Richard kept very detailed notes. I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. He was worried about you, Mark. So worried that he wove his concerns right into our history, right into the tapestry on that wall. I placed the vial on the table and slid a single sheet of paper from my pocket, my transcribed notes. Chloe stared at the thread, her brow furrowed in disbelief. Mark's eyes were wide with a dawning, primal terror. I began to read. Memo, dated 1 week before the fatal collapse at the Pinewood site. Subject: Structural Integrity Report. Note reads: Payment of $50,000 authorized to Safety Inspector Robert Quinn for falsification of pre-collapse report. Purpose: to bypass costly reinforcement protocols and accelerate project timeline. Does that sound familiar, Mark? Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark? What is she talking about? Mark was silent, paralyzed. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. I didn't wait for his answer. I continued reading, my voice a relentless, damning rhythm. Wire transfer confirmation. dated 2 weeks after the death of Daniel Martinez, from Northwood Insurance to Viridian Holdings, account number 78, B 443, Cayman National Trust. Amount $2.1 million. I looked up from the paper. Your company was bankrupt, Mark. Your investors were ruined. But your secret account in the Cayman Islands did very well out of that unforeseeable accident, didn't it? Chloe was staring at her husband, her face a mask of utter horror and disbelief. The man she had defended, the man for whom she had betrayed her own mother, was a stranger. A monster. Mark? She whispered, her voice trembling. Is this true? He didn't answer her. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on the tapestry hanging on the wall behind me. The source, the proof, the silent witness that had finally found its voice. Reason abandoned him. The veneer of civilization cracked and fell away, revealing the desperate animal beneath. With a guttural roar of pure fury, he lunged. Not at me. Not at Chloe. He launched himself across the dining table, sending glasses and the pathetic casserole dish crashing to the floor. His target was the tapestry. He was going to rip it from the wall, tear it to shreds, destroy the evidence with his bare hands. That was the moment the front door swung open. It wasn't a dramatic, crashing entrance. It was a quiet, firm, and inevitable one. 2 uniformed police officers stepped calmly into the hall, followed by the grim, resolute figure of Martin Abernathy. They had seen it all on the live feed. The confession by silence. The violent lunge to destroy evidence. They had more than probable cause. Mark froze mid-lunge, his hands outstretched, his face a mask of primal, thwarted rage. His world, so carefully constructed on a foundation of lies and death, had just collapsed. Completely. The aftermath wasn't a loud, shattering explosion. It was the quiet, ringing silence that follows one. The air in my house, once thick with secrets, now felt thin and brittle, as if the slightest sound would crack it into a million pieces. Mark was gone. The police were gone. The flashing lights that had painted the street in garish strokes of red and blue had vanished, leaving behind an ordinary suburban night. But nothing was ordinary anymore. Ava sat with me at the kitchen table, her hand resting over mine, a small, warm anchor in the disorienting sea of silence. She hadn't said much since they led Mark away. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. The house, my home of 50 years, felt like a stranger's. Every shadow seemed to hold the ghost of the confrontation, every creak of the floorboards a new accusation. The great tapestry in the living room, the silent witness, was now cordoned off with yellow tape, a crime scene within a crime scene. Within a day, the silence was shattered by a new kind of noise. A media storm. It started with a local news blog, then a city paper, then the national outlets. They'd latched onto the story with a ravenous hunger. Someone, a journalist with a flair for the dramatic, had coined a phrase. It was everywhere. On my laptop screen, on the news tickers. Ava scrolled through on her phone with a grim expression. The Weaver's Gambit. They painted me as some kind of master strategist, a cunning matriarch who had laid an intricate trap. They didn't understand. It wasn't a gambit. It was survival. It was the desperate, last act of a woman with nothing left to lose. The phone began to ring, and ring, and ring. Unfamiliar numbers from all over the country. Journalists, producers, authors, all wanting a piece of the story. My story, the one that had been stolen from me, and that I had just barely managed to reclaim. Ava became my shield. No comment, she'd say, her voice firm, professional before hanging up. She unplugged the landline. She screened my cell phone calls. She drew the curtains against the news vans that had started to park across the street, their long-lensed cameras aimed at my front door like sniper rifles. "They're vultures, Grandma," she said, her eyes flashing with a protective fire I hadn't seen in her since she was a little girl defending a stray cat. "They don't care about you. They just care about the clicks." My world had shrunk to the four walls of my house, but the legal world was expanding at a dizzying pace. Mr. Abernathy, Richard's old lawyer, came to the house a few days later. He bypassed the media circus with the practiced ease of a man used to navigating conflict. He sat in Richard's old armchair, a thick file on his lap, his expression a mixture of somberness and a kind of fierce pride. "Liz," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I need you to understand what's happening. The district attorney is moving forward with multiple charges against Mark." He opened the file. Fraud, obviously. The insurance scam related to the construction project. The evidence from the microfilaments is irrefutable. Richard's documentation was meticulous. He paused, looking at me over the rim of his glasses. "But it's more than that now. The family of the foreman who died in that collapse. The man Mark called an unfortunate accident. They've reopened their civil suit. And the DA, Liz, the DA is pressing for negligent homicide." The words hung in the air. Negligent homicide. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a house or a forged signature on a medical evaluation. It was about a life. A man who went to work one day and never came home, all because Mark wanted to cut corners to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford. The weight of it settled in my chest, heavy and cold. This was the true, ugly secret that had been woven into my art. Richard must have suspected. He must have known the depths of Mark's depravity. His warning wasn't just about protecting me. It was about delivering a justice he never could in life. And then there was Chloe. Her fallout was a different kind of explosion. A social one. Ava would sometimes read me snippets, her voice flat, trying to strip the words of their venom. Chloe was a pariah. In the digital town square of social media, she was tried and convicted as an accomplice. Her photos with Mark, once symbols of a perfect life, were now exhibits for the prosecution in the court of public opinion. Friends she'd had for decades posted public condemnations. The charities she volunteered for quietly removed her name from their websites. She was the woman who had stood by, the wife who had enabled, the daughter who had betrayed. She had lost her husband, her reputation, her social standing, and the inheritance she had been so desperate to secure. She had lost everything. And in a way, I understood that she was a victim too. A victim of her own weakness, her own choices. We met one last time. Not in a home, not in a place filled with memories, but in the most sterile, impersonal environment imaginable. A conference room at Mr. Abernathy's law firm. The table between us was long and polished, reflecting the cold, fluorescent lights above. It felt 100 miles wide. She looked diminished. The vibrant, confident woman I had raised was gone. In her place was a hollowed-out shell. Her eyes were puffy and red, her skin pale. She wore a simple grey sweater, as if trying to make herself disappear. She was the first to speak, her voice a raw, ragged sob that was immediately swallowed by the soundproofed walls. I didn't know. Her eyes pleaded with me, desperate for some sliver of belief, of absolution. "I swear to God, Mom, I didn't know about the money from the insurance. I didn't know about that man, the foreman. Mark told me it was a tragic accident. I believed him." The tears streamed down her face, falling onto the polished wood of the table. I believed him. I looked at my daughter, my only child, and I felt nothing. The searing anger, the deep, wounding betrayal had all burned away. leaving behind only the cold, hard ash of truth. My voice, when it came, was flat, devoid of heat, of accusation, of anything at all. It was the voice of a judge reading a final verdict. "No," I said. "You probably didn't know about the accident. Mark wouldn't have trusted you with a secret that big, a secret that could land him in prison." I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, and I extinguished it. "But you knew about me." She flinched, as if I had struck her. "What?" "You knew he was trying to erase me," I said, my voice as steady as the rhythmic beat of a loom. "Don't tell me you didn't know that. I was there. I saw it in your eyes every single day." I leaned forward just slightly, my hands flat on the table. "You knew he was trying to have me declared incompetent. You sat there and nodded while he talked about how forgetful I was, how the house was too much for me. You brought the doctor to my home, his paid-for liar, and you smiled your sweet, concerned smile. You helped him. You were his partner in that. We were just worried about you," she cried, the desperation in her voice rising. "The house is so big. You were all alone." "Stop," I said. The word was quiet, but it cut through her protests like a blade. "Just stop lying. To me and to yourself. You weren't worried. You were impatient. You looked at me, your mother, and you didn't see a person. You saw a roadblock. You saw a $3 million asset that was inconveniently still breathing." The truth was brutal, and I refused to soften it. "You helped him pack my memories into boxes. You helped him measure my life for a coffin you called a care facility. You were going to let him ship me off to Silver Pines to rot, and you were going to tell yourself you were doing it for my own good while you cashed the check from the sale of my home. So don't you dare sit here and tell me what you didn't know. You didn't know about the dead man, Chloe. But you were perfectly willing to bury your own mother alive." A terrible, broken sound escaped her lips. It was the sound of a soul fracturing. She finally understood. The chasm between us wasn't just a disagreement. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a grave. And she had been holding the shovel. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. I walked out of the room, leaving her there with the wreckage of her life, and I did not look back. The first thing I did was sell the house. I had to. The memories were tainted, the very air poisoned by what had happened there. The laughter in the walls now sounded like mockery. Richard's presence, once a comfort, now felt like a sad ghost, chained to a place of betrayal. I let the ghosts go. I called a real estate agent, a brisk, no-nonsense woman who saw property, not history. "I want it sold," I told her. Fast. Packing was an act of emotional archaeology. I unearthed layers of my life, one box at a time. A box of old photographs. Richard and me on our honeymoon, sand in our hair and the whole world in our eyes. A young Chloe on a swing set, her pigtails flying, her face a sunburst of pure joy. I looked at that little girl, and for a moment, my resolve wavered. Where did she go? How did she become the woman in that conference room? I packed the photos away. Some memories were too heavy to carry. I hired a team of professional packers. I couldn't do it myself. It felt too much like presiding over an autopsy. I stood in the doorway of my studio, directing them with a new, quiet authority. "That loom stays with me," I said. "The rest of the supplies, donate them." The great tapestry, my masterpiece of secrets, was still in a police evidence locker. I didn't need it anymore. I had my story back. It wasn't trapped in the threads. It was mine. The day the for sale sign went up on the lawn, I felt a profound sense of release. It was a public declaration. The house sold in less than a week. For cash. to a developer who probably planned to tear it down and build something modern and soulless in its place. I was fine with that. Let him. Let him erase the foundation. The story wasn't in the bricks and mortar. It was in me. With a significant portion of the money, I did something Richard would have been proud of. I met with Mr. Abernathy and a financial advisor. I wanted to build something. Not just live off the proceeds of a sale. I wanted to create a legacy that wasn't about a house or an inheritance, but about justice. We established a foundation. I knew its name immediately. The Richard Hale Foundation for Truth. Because that's what Richard had valued above all else. Truth, honesty, integrity. The very things Mark had despised. The Foundation's mission was clear: to provide legal aid and financial support to victims of elder financial abuse, to fight the marks of the world. We would fund awareness campaigns, not just in newspapers, but on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, where young people like Ava could see them. We'd create short, sharp videos showing families the subtle signs, the sudden interest in finances, the casual remarks about forgetfulness, the isolation from old friends. We would give a voice to the silent victims, the ones told they were a burden, the ones being quietly erased by their own families. It was my way of honoring Richard, not by clinging to his memory, but by weaponizing his principles for good. The rest of the money, I invested quietly. I didn't need much. I wanted a life, not a lifestyle. The most important investment I made was in Ava. I called her over for dinner one last night in the empty, echoing house. We ate pizza sitting on the floor of the living room. "I'm giving you the money for the rest of your education," I told her, passing her a slice. "And enough to give you a solid start when you graduate. A down payment on a small apartment, a cushion so you don't have to take the first job that comes along." She started to protest. "Grandma, no, you don't have to do that. I can take out loans." I met her gaze, and she saw the iron in my expression. No more debt. No more struggling. Your grandfather and I built a life for our family. Your father, Mark, tried to burn it all down. This isn't a gift, Ava. It's your legacy. A clean slate. I want you to build something new from the ashes. No strings attached. Just a future. Make it a good one. She saw I wouldn't be argued with. She just nodded, her eyes shining with tears. But these were different tears. They were tears of gratitude, of hope. The day the movers came for the last of my things, I did one final walkthrough of the house. It was a hollow shell. The walls were bare, marked with the faint outlines of where pictures had hung for decades. The floors were scuffed from the movers' boots. The sun streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating nothing. The ghosts were gone. The secrets were gone. It was just a house. An empty, silent building. I pulled the front door closed, heard the final click of the latch, and walked away without looking back. My new apartment is small. It's less than a quarter of the size of the old house, but it feels infinitely larger. It's on the third floor of a modern building with a balcony that overlooks the Pacific Ocean. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It doesn't smell of dust and old paper and secrets. It smells of salt and clean open air. The sound isn't the groan of old wood, but the constant rhythmic shush of the waves against the shore. It's the sound of breathing. The world is breathing. I am breathing. I bought a new loom. It's not the giant, imposing creature that dominated my old studio. It's smaller, sleeker, made of light-coloured wood and steel. A modern loom for a modern life. It sits by the glass doors of the balcony, and as I work, I can see the endless blue of the ocean. I'm not weaving secrets anymore. I'm weaving with light, with colour, with the simple, honest texture of wool and cotton and silk. Ava visits on the weekends. The shadow of the past months is receding from her face, replaced by the excitement of her final year of college and the future that lies beyond it. The visits are no longer about crisis management. They are about connection. I'm teaching her to weave. Her fingers, so adept at flying across a keyboard or a phone screen, are clumsy at first with the threads. But she's a patient student. Don't pull the weft so tight, I told her last Saturday. My hands guiding hers. You're not fighting it. You just guide it. Let it find its own place in the warp. The tension should be even, firm, but gentle. You create the structure, but the thread has to be allowed to be itself within it. She looked up at me and smiled. A real, uncomplicated smile. Okay, Grandma, I get it. In that moment, I wasn't just teaching her about weaving. I was passing on the best part of my legacy, the craft itself, cleansed and made new. We were creating something new from simple threads, our hands moving in a quiet, shared rhythm. Last week, my phone buzzed on the small table next to my loom. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from a number I hadn't seen in months, but a name I would never forget. Chloe. My breath caught in my chest. For a long moment, I just stared at it, at the stark black letters on the white screen. I thought about ignoring it. I thought about deleting it. But my finger, acting of its own accord, tapped open the message. There was no greeting, no preamble, no explanation, just 3 words. I am sorry. The period at the end seemed so small, so inadequate to carry the weight of everything that had happened. I read the words over and over. I am sorry. Sorry for what? For trying to steal my home, for trying to lock me away, for shattering our family, for believing a monster, for her own weakness, for all of it. I didn't reply. I set the phone back down on the table, screen side down. I stood up and walked out onto the balcony. The sun was just beginning to rise, spilling liquid gold across the dark water. The air was cool and clean. I thought about the broken threads on a loom. A weaver knows you can't just tie a knot to fix them. A knot is a flaw, a lump in the pattern, a scar that disrupts the whole design. It's always there, a reminder of the break. To truly mend a thread, you have to do it with patience. You have to unweave the broken parts carefully, painstakingly. You have to find the 2 frayed ends and gently, deliberately weave them back into the hole, one over, one under, until the break disappears into the fabric itself. It's a slow, quiet, deliberate act. It isn't forgiveness. Not in a single moment. It's the long, hard work of mending. I hadn't replied to Chloe's text. Not yet. Some threads, once broken, take a long, long time to mend. But as I stood there, watching the sun climb higher, feeling the first warmth of the day on my face, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet, gentle tug. The first thread of a new pattern. A future I hadn't designed yet. A future I would weave for myself, on my own terms, one thread at a time.